Hey family, it's Dr. Yola coming to you to address the formula shortage issue. I've had the opportunity to talk in various media outlets about it, and I wanted to come to you directly to address what it is, what can we do about it, what are the sort of the do's and don'ts. I know we've heard a lot about the don'ts, but I want to talk about some of the do's. So let's talk about what is this thing about a formula shortage? Is this a way for the big formula industry to just get more money? The answer is no. There's an actual formula shortage. We actually observed it as early as July of 2021 as a direct consequence of the pandemic. We know that there were supply chain issues related to the creation of formula. There were labor shortages related to the creation of formula. Even inflation, because of the pandemic and other things happening across the globe, like the war in Ukraine, have caused everything, all prices to increase. So if it's costing more for us, it's also costing more for manufacturers to be able to produce items like formula. And so it became this perfect storm. But I just want people to recognize that we started to observe reduction in formula availability as early as the middle of last year. It just came to a head to an acute crisis back in February of this year, when one of the three major formula producers, Abbott, had a potential contamination of one of their plants here in the United States that caused 4 infants to get sick. 2 of them actually died because of the concerns that were discovered. And these weren't concerns that were discovered just in 2022. Some of these concerns were present as early as 2019. But because of the acuteness of it, with these babies getting sick and 2 of them dying, factory gets shut down. And now Abbott's feet are held to the fire to figure out what they're going to do to fix the issue. The challenge is that when you add in supply chain issues, labor issues, inflation, and then the shutdown of one of the 3 major suppliers of baby formula, here we are with a 43% reduction in the availability of formula across the country. And then when you add on top of that, previous issues in terms of the blockage of importation of baby formula from other places across the globe, it made it even more difficult for the United States to anticipate the need and fill those gaps. Places like Canada, our neighbor, we don't import because really the tariffs that were placed in the former administration that make it cost prohibitive to import formula from Canada. Not only that, a lot of the countries outside of the US, they have to meet certain FDA requirements, but interestingly enough, some of the requirements in other countries are actually more stringent than here in the United States. As an example, in the European Union, formula producers are not allowed to use added sugar like corn syrup. They're also required to have their formulas composed at least 30% of the protein coming from lactose. And we don't see those same requirements here in the United States. So that's where we are now. And when you look across the country, different states are impacted in a differential way. For instance, in Houston, they have a 52% reduction in the availability of formula, and certain populations are impacted differently. So if you are a parent who is a recipient of a program called Women's, Infant, and Children, a supplemental food program, something known as WIC, you're even more impacted because guess what? The contracted formula provider for WIC is Abbott. So for WIC vouchers to be used, you have to use the contract approved formula. And although the FDA and the USDA have given some freedoms in terms of being able to access other formulas, not all families, not even all WIC offices are putting that practice or putting that change in policy into practice. And so we really have to recognize the differential impact that this is having on families who are receiving WIC. You can't use WIC vouchers online. Families are having to come out of pocket where they had not anticipated having to cover the cost of formula because they meet the financial requirements to qualify for WIC. And so I really want to make sure that I create space for us to acknowledge how this is differentially impacting families who receive the WIC program. So where are we now? Right now, we have 3 major companies that are producing formula. Abbott, which is pretty much shut down here in the country, which impacts about a third of our formula production. We have Mead Johnson, which is the producer of Enfamil. The company is also known as I'm trying to remember the name of the company, Reckitt, because I know them as Mead Johnson, but they're now Reckitt, which is an interesting name for a baby formula company. And then Gerber, what we've all grown up knowing. So that's where we are in terms of who are the major producers. But the problem with the focus on those major producers of formula is that we forget about store brand formula that can be used. And we'll talk in a little bit about what you can do in terms of replacing what may be one of the standard formula offerings. All right. The other thing that I want to make sure that we acknowledge is that manufacturers, those other two manufacturers, have started to ramp up the production of their baby formulas as much as they can, given, again, the supply chain issues that were already in existence. But this doesn't really do much for about 5,000 babies in the country that are on specialized formula. So even if you get a store brand formula or can switch to a store brand formula because your baby was previously on the regular formula, for about 5,000 babies in the country, they can't just switch over to a store brand. They actually take a very specialized formula because of either allergy issues or other digestive issues. So that's something we have to take into consideration. The good news is that Abbott has come into agreement with the FDA in terms of how they're going to reconcile some of these issues that are in their factory. The challenge is that it's going to take them another 2 weeks to implement everything. And then once they implement all of the processes to address the issues, it will take another 6 to 8 weeks for formula supplies to get back to where they were at baseline. And so clearly we're going to be in this for a little while longer. So what I want to do is talk specifically about what we can do. I know we hear a lot about what we can't do, but I want to focus on what we can do. One of the things that we can do is reach out specifically to the manufacturers. There are hotlines that you can connect with in order to find out. For instance, with Gerber. Gerber has a hotline where it will connect parents to a lactation specialist, to a nurse hotline, to be able to navigate you through what formula can you switch your baby to if you find that you need to switch them because you can't find the formula that your baby needs. Abbott now has a way for OBGYNs and pediatricians to fill out almost a prior authorization for us to specifically request these specialized formulas for our patients. Now, that doesn't do much for families who don't have a regular healthcare provider. What I would suggest is go to a federally qualified health center where you can be connected to a provider. Now, keep in mind that we still have to be concerned about some of this contamination within these Abbott plants. The FDA actually put out a notice that said we can fill out these requests, but keep in mind that there may still be a potential contamination, which does not give parents much peace at all. But at least know that there is a way for your healthcare provider to be able to make a request for you to get these specialized formulas. We actually have to fill out a document to make that happen. And then with the Mead Johnson company, you can also reach out to them directly to find out what are some of the safe substitutions if your baby's formula is not available. All right. Now, there are some community resources. There's some social media resources. I am part of a couple of mom groups where people have just done an amazing job of working together. If they have extra formula, they're able to provide that and folks can come and pick it up. Some retailers have limited how much formula parents can buy so as to prevent from hoarding, because that did happen when it was first noted that we were dealing with a shortage, which is why retailers have had to limit the amount of formula that folks can buy. So we have to keep that in mind, and it's unfortunate that they have to do it, but it's one of those things like when we had to limit the number of toilet tissue packs we bought because folks were out stockpiling it. This is not the time to stockpile. We really want to make sure that we provide resources for all families to be able to have access to formula. There is a community action agency across the country. These are organizations that can help actually link you to resources that may be able to have supplies of formula available. There is an organization called Feeding America that may have resources, and United Way may also have resources linking you to available formula. And I know some people hesitate to tap into it, but human milk banks are also an option. I know some people are like, human milk banks? I'm not giving somebody else's breast milk to my baby. What I will tell you is that I donated when I finished my breastfeeding journey. I donated milk. There is a fantastic, very stringent screening process that we go through when we are donors. They test the milk to make sure that it is safe, and it certainly is an option for parents if that's something that you want to consider. And then finding out from your local WIC agency, are they familiar with the ability to use WIC vouchers for other formulas that may be available? That's another consideration. And your doctor can actually fill out a WIC form to allow you to get a non-contracted formula. So even if we may not have the formula in our office, we do have the capacity to write out a request for WIC to give permission to give a different formula. So that's another opportunity for us as healthcare providers to help in this situation. In terms of finding formula, it may help to go to a smaller retailer. Even your corner store may have formulas. This is something that we don't often think about. We think about big box retailers, but small corner stores may have it. Convenience stores may have formula available. As I mentioned before, considering using the store brand is perfectly acceptable. The ingredients are the same. They just don't have the monopoly that Abbott, Mead Johnson, and Gerber do in terms of being ever present in commercials, in magazines, and in local hospitals, right? And then in terms of last resort, what can you do? There are toddler formulas. So if your little one is close to the age of 12 months, I would not do this for a little one, like a 4-month-old, a 6-month-old, a tiny baby. But if they are close to 12 months old, they're between 10 and 11 months old, you can get them on a toddler formula for at least a couple of days until you can find a formula that's appropriate for them. And clearly this is for babies who are not on a specialized formula. And when push comes to shove, and I know some of you, especially if you are vegan, you're going to be like, ooh, you're going to clutch your pearls. But just for a brief period of time, even though it hurts my heart to say it, you can use a little bit of cow's milk. We do not recommend cow's milk prior to the age of 12 months for a couple of reasons. One, because cow's milk is not necessarily the best source of iron. We know that formula is fortified with iron to meet the needs of a baby, and cow's milk is not. Number two, cow's milk can cause constipation and GI upset, even for babies who do not have a milk protein allergy. Cow's milk can actually cause a little bit of irritation of the lining of the stomach and cause a little bit of microscopic bleeding as well. And I know I'm saying that, you're like, well, then I don't want to give cow's milk. But if push comes to shove, we do what we need to do. I would do no more than about 24 ounces per day and make sure that your baby is getting other iron-rich sources. If you find that there's no formula available and you have to keep your baby on cow's milk for a little while, then it's important to make sure you communicate with your primary care provider. We may need to even start your baby on iron supplements if they are on cow's milk for longer than a week or so, all right? In terms of plant-based milks, let's transition into what are the things that we don't necessarily recommend. So what are the things that we would tell you not to do in this? And I want to end it with this as opposed to beginning it, because I know a lot of us have heard a lot about what you shouldn't do. So plant-based milks, especially if you're buying it over the counter, you're getting the silk, the whatever variety of milk you get from the retailer, most of those milks are not nutrient fortified. They may have a little bit of vitamin D, but all of the vitamins and nutrients that a growing baby needs are just not present in the regular retail plant-based milks. Now, if you're making your own, you're crushing the almonds and squeezing them up and doing all those things to maintain the nutrient richness of the milk, that's a completely different story. But for a lot of the store-branded plant-based milks, there aren't a lot of nutrients and protein in them, particularly calcium. Calcium and iron are the major ones that we have to think about, but really across the vitamin spectrum. The second thing, I know you've heard a lot about it, making your own formula, using a little evaporated milk, throwing in a little corn syrup and whatever else is in the recipe. I know there was a study done in Australia. Your grandmother used to do it. But here's my response. There are a lot of things that our parents and our grandparents did that we as pediatricians and other healthcare professionals do not recommend. Particularly for making your own formula. Back in the 60s and 50s, there was really no other option, right? We know that formula is a relatively new development, comparatively speaking. We did what we had to do, but when we know better, we do better, right? We know that back in the 50s and 60s, women actually used to smoke so that their babies in the womb would not grow too big, and that would decrease the risk of complications. Clearly, we don't do that anymore. So we have to be very careful about equating what was done in the past to the appropriateness of it now. The reason why we do not recommend homemade formulas is, one, once you get to the evaporated milk and the corn syrup, how are you going to put all of the nutrients in this homemade formula to make it comparable to either breast milk or formula? When you think about the creation of formula, these big formula companies are forever striving to make their formula as similar to breast milk as possible. There is no homemade combination that compares to either breast milk or formula, which is created to be a close second to breast milk. And I'm not going to tell you breast is best and all those things, because only 1 in 4 parents exclusively breastfeed throughout their baby's infancy. That's the reality of it. And so I want to really honor those who cannot or choose not to breastfeed, where formula, there's no option. It's formula or my baby doesn't have food to eat. And I get that, but I want us to be very careful in approaching this from a homemade formula standpoint. Not to mention the fact that not everybody is as sterile as they need to be. The big concern that we had with this whole Abbott issue was contamination, right? And I'm not saying that everybody is going to codify the baby's formula as they make it, but mistakes happen. And so for all of those reasons, it's best not to make a homemade formula. All right. The third thing that we want to advise against is diluting formula. You want to make your formula as is instructed on the can. And the reason for that is that babies, until about the age of 12 months, their little kidneys aren't yet mature enough to be able to tell the body how much water to keep inside and how much water to pee out. They cannot concentrate their urine so that their systems don't get too diluted. So not only would we risk, if we diluted the formula, in our babies not getting enough nutrients, which is usually the first thing that we worry about, the other thing that we worry about is diluting their systems, which can cause all kinds of issues, inclusive of a lowered sodium level, which can cause issues with their developing brains, significant issues. So those are the reasons why we do not dilute the baby's formula. And I know these can sometimes for parents be desperate times. I've talked to a couple of families and heard the desperation in their voices. As a mommy, when my little one was a tiny baby, just a couple of weeks old, she had a milk protein allergy. I was dealing with some breastfeeding issues, and I was in a panic, not knowing what formula I was going to be able to get her. And so even for me to experience just a minimal panic compared to what some families are experiencing, driving city to city, having families mail in formula because they can't find any in their local town or city. My heart goes out to you, and I hope that this information helps. Please reach out. We'll definitely talk about this more as things progress, but I hope that this serves some hope and gives you some information. Take care. Love you guys. Dr. Yola out.